47 is on the move. Right now, President Trump is on board Air Force One. He's headed to wildfire-ravaged Los Angeles, where Governor Gavin Newsom is expected to show up uninvited. Trump spending his afternoon touring Hurricane Helene damage in Asheville, North Carolina, consoling a community there that really feels forgotten, while making a ton of news, including this moment when he mulled signing an executive order to get rid of FEMA. Here's why.
I'll also be signing an executive order to begin the process of fundamentally reforming and overhauling FEMA, or maybe getting rid of FEMA. I think, frankly, FEMA is not good. FEMA gets here and they don't know the area. They've never been to the area, and they want to give you rules that you've never heard about. They want to bring people that aren't as good as the people you already have. And FEMA's turned out to be a disaster.
And while we await the president's arrival in Los Angeles, Governor Newsom and L.A. Mayor Karen Bass were told will be there on the tarmac when the president lands. Now, it's no secret that Newsom and Trump have disagreed over how to battle the wildfires that have ravaged the area. Earlier, the president laying out his expectations for the visit.
I want to see two things in Los Angeles: voter ID, so that the people have a chance to vote, and I want to see the water be released and come down into Los Angeles and throughout the state. Those are the two things. After that, I will be the greatest president that California has ever seen.
And here is what Governor Newsom had to say about the president.
I'm grateful, though, that he took our invitation to heart and that he will be here tomorrow. It's my understanding. I look forward to being there on the tarmac to thank the president, welcome him, and we're making sure that all the resources he needs for a successful briefing are provided to him.
Okay, so my first question was, when I thought about Newsom and Bass being on the tarmac, did they not see, Judge, his conversation with the leaders at Davos? He was pretty direct about how he felt about how things were going on the stage, international stage, but he's going to be face-to-face with these guys in California.
Oh, yeah, he's going to tell them exactly what he thinks. And, you know, I find it fascinating that Newsom is trying to be the guy in charge. You know, I'm the one who invited him. He took me up on my offer, as if the president needs to be invited anywhere. I mean, this is a clear disaster area that continues to be a disaster area. But, you know, Newsom knows that his future relies on this, and it's riding on these fires, how he handles them. I don't think he's doing so well, and I think the passage of time is only making it worse when they get back to their homes and realize they've got to start from scratch. And, you know, in his first term, President Trump told Newsom that he's got to clean up the forest. And in his first term, President Trump, who's got 50 states to worry about, is prescient enough to say, Newsom, you've got to get the water from Northern California, from the mountains, the rivers, the streams, the snow melt, and not send it out to the Pacific, but send it to Southern California. I mean, you know, this president has been so prescient about the issue of immigration and how much trouble would be in not vetting these people, having an open border. Now America's with him on that. He was prescient about this. And we're talking about, what, 8 years ago? So, you know, Newsom and Bass and all the rest of them can get out there and make like they're doing their job. They're not. But when we saw President Trump in California, he was doing what people want their president to do. They want their president to show up, to talk to ordinary people, to find out what the problem is, how we can fix it, take down the name of the insurance company that isn't giving them the money. How can they be expected to rebuild if they have no money? They can't get their hands on the FEMA money. And the president is doing this all in front of us. He's accountable. He's transparent. He's what we need. And by the way, do you remember Palestine? With all the problems in Palestine? I mean, FEMA's messed that up, too. It should go, and I guarantee you he's going to take it apart.
Well, the people of that train derailment in Ohio were waiting for months and months and months. Every time it sounded like the White House was going to arrange a visit there, President Biden didn't go. Harold, President Trump, even when he wasn't president, has made a name for showing up to some of these places. He did in Georgia as well after Helene, while he was on the campaign trail. And I got to say, hearing from those people today was really heartbreaking, and it was powerful.
There's no doubt. It's good to be with you this afternoon. It is, as I tried to share yesterday, President Trump is a different kind of president. There's a lack of conventionality to him. There's a lack of orthodoxy to him that is really good in some ways. And I think part of what he said today, I couldn't agree with more. I don't know if I would get rid of FEMA, but what I interpret him saying is he wants to reform FEMA. When you think about it, the whole organization, FEMA, is organized around responding to something that's gone really bad. So you would think that you would have, and I'm sure they do, but it doesn't seem like they always are prepared. You would have people who know different regions of the country, different terrains in the country, the kinds of things that could afflict different parts of the country, and they could assemble those teams locally to be able to help them better. It was heartbreaking to see months after what happened in North Carolina. I listened to some of those families who are still living day to day, who are still living in conditions and circumstances that you wouldn't think in America we'd be living in. So I hope the president, I know sometimes he gets worked up into politics and can get a little momentum behind him and he'll say some things. But I think what he said initially about FEMA and reforming is the right thing. Where I differ with him a little bit, Shannon, is the notion of conditionality around helping Americans who happen to be in a state where the president's political party is not in charge. Can you imagine if a Democratic president went to a southern or Midwestern state after a disaster and said, look, I'm going to give you all the things you need if you change your voter laws? I get the president wanting to make recommendations about political changes, but politicians should never put their interests in front of people's interests, even if the politics in that state is to their liking or to their chagrin. We are all Americans, and those people suffering in North Carolina, again, I think it was so great we carried it like we did on this network, because I don't think people fully appreciate that they're still living that way months after all this happened. So I applaud the president in a huge way on the reforms and in the right talk about what he wants to do in making FEMA work better, but let's not condition the relief on politics.
Well, Jesse, how does Newsom play this? I don't know that he has a lot of leverage in this situation, but he says he's going to show up and be there. Is it super awkward, or are these guys sort of frenemies and they work through it today?
Frenemies. At first, someone said it was like he was streaking in the quad, and then he turned around and no one was following him.
Right.
Because the resistance armies disappeared. So now when he was inaugurated, they had the flags lowered for Carter. He raised them, and that was a big symbol that he wanted to play ball. Now, he can show up at the tarmac, and he can either be Chris Christie or Jan Brewer. Remember Brewer in Arizona with the finger point? And then there was Christie, open arms. A lot of people in his party didn't like that. He has to do something. And I disagree with Harold. You have to condition this. It's like car insurance, Harold. If you keep wrecking your vehicle, the insurance company's not just going to keep paying the claims. They're going to make you take a defensive driving course. Just like California has to do. They have to start managing their state better and do all the things Janine said. Now, I wouldn't link it to voter ID.
That's what I meant.
I would link it to getting prepared with your water and your reservoirs and your forest management. But by the way, Harold, aren't they still counting votes in California?
And Pennsylvania.
They're still counting votes.
We've got a race call to make. Right now.
But they do need to reform FEMA, and that's not a partisan issue.
I agree with
the
you.
last four FEMA heads, 2 Dems, 2 Republicans, all say it needs to be overhauled because these states aren't prepared, and then they get bad bailouts because FEMA's not prepared. So they need some sort of disaster deductible to straighten it out.
Greg, I feel the Sharpie. I hear it moving fast and furious over here. I'm getting a little high off of the fumes.
Oh,
Tell us what you've written.
Evil Shannon Bream. Just stepping back, I just feel like, are there any politicians or political parties left? Like, I feel as though Trump has flooded the zone. He's disappeared Democrats from the game board, but also any kind of like never Trumpy Republican. Do they still exist? I don't think there's been any Republican president that's had a week like this. I don't remember it. The party has never been this effective or successful in my lifetime. I mean, maybe over time it happens, but you can't have a better week than this. And a lot of this stuff that he's doing, you know, in the executive orders, but also here, is a layup because the solutions were always there. It's just that the Dems refused to accept them. It was a failure not just of common sense, but also a failure of will. No one is having any issue with what Trump is doing. They just didn't know it wasn't being done. They didn't know what they were missing, including in disasters. This is a contrast between an actual president and a cardboard prop. You know, Trump is aware of what's going on the ground. He actually listens to people. And if you tell him something, he's going to do something about it. For some reason, he's engaged, whether it's in crime, he'll talk to victims. With immigration, he'll talk to border agents. He talks to people in AI. He seems to get a grasp of almost every issue by talking to the people involved. But if you were in a disaster or a catastrophe, if you were a victim, and you went on any network and you were pleading, it would never get to Biden. Either he couldn't hear it or he wouldn't do anything about it. And when you watch Trump act, signing all these executive orders and attacking every problem, you don't just see his effectiveness, you realize what was missing. A leader. We had 4 years without a leader, and now we're acting like, wow, this feels pretty good. It's like having suddenly you're like, oh, now I know what this is like. This is how it works. Pretty good.
Well, and, now hearing from members of Congress, cabinet secretaries, all kinds of people who said they couldn't get to President Biden for these conversations.
Yes.
It does feel abruptly different.
So just 3 days into his presidency, President Trump is on the move across the country already. And today he's about to make his second stop as commander-in-chief to see the devastation from the wildfires that have ravaged so much of California. Now, earlier today, we watched him in North Carolina, where some of those areas are still devastated and trying to recover from Hurricane Helene, despite an unresponsive FEMA. They're still going through this 4 months later. The president heard personal accounts. He was with the first lady, as you see in these images here. She was very consoling to a number of these victims as well. These people said they made it out alive, but they're still in desperate need for help. Watch.
Grabbed my purse and my little pug dog, and my husband grabbed dog food and put it in a trash bag, and by the time we got out into the driveway, it was already waist deep, and there was sticks and that kind of thing. I didn't think I was going to make it.
We tried to make our way back in there and gather things best we could, but found a body right away. There was about 8 bodies in our area that first 2 weeks located.
There were like a lot of family members there that passed away, like 11 of them, and there were people out everywhere looking for their loved ones, and there were dead bodies. My son's like, Mom, you're going to see things you don't want to see.
Just an absolute nightmare, and good to be reminded of what our fellow Americans are going through in this part of North Carolina. I mean, I think she was referring to the Craig family, who lost 11 members of their family. And as she said, can you imagine the United States of America walking around trying to find the bodies in a situation like that and nobody there to help? The president said that he would sign an executive order to potentially get rid of FEMA, saying maybe it's not the best way to organize these kinds of help efforts. Watch.
FEMA has been a very big disappointment. They cost a tremendous amount of money. It's very bureaucratic, and it's very slow. Other than that, we're very happy with them. I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away, and we pay directly. We pay a percentage to the state, but the state should fix this. If the state did this from the beginning, it would have been a lot better situation.
The waters got so high that it actually lifted between that and the tornado that came through, or microburst is what they've been calling them, and lifted his home and the house that I grew up in and crashed it into our barn. It took away his business. It took away all of our tools and tractors and everything needed to keep the farm going.
Residents in North Carolina still suffering from Hurricane Helene. And today, President Trump was there to hear them out. The man you just heard there, Curtis A. Rife, and his wife, Amber, they join me now on The Will Cain Show. Curtis, thanks for being with us. We heard from you a little bit earlier today. Welcome to you as well, Amber. Curtis, we heard you earlier today there with President Trump. Tell me what it felt like today. We'll start with today, and then we'll work ourselves backwards. But what was it like today to speak to President Trump?
It was a lot of relief. People keep saying, how are you guys doing in Asheville? And, we feel like you've been forgotten. And I don't think we've been forgotten. I think we've been ignored. So for him to come and see us today, that was a big relief. We previously had J.D. Vance come out to our house with Samaritan's Purse and some of the grams. And, he told us that they were coming, and we were glad to see them.
Amber, tell me what it's been like since the flood, and as your husband Curtis described today, the microburst, the tornado that helped destroy, I'm sure, not just your home, but your town. What has life been like in the months since? Where are you living? What are the circumstances?
I would say it's a true nightmare. We just live day by day, one day at a time, trying to clean up, trying to see what our next steps are, if we're going to be able to rebuild, if we're not going to be able to rebuild, waiting on, insurance or whatever it may be. So it's been a struggle. It really has.
And literally, Amber, if you could help us all understand, where have you been able to live? I know there was some FEMA transitional assistance to stay in hotels for many people, but what's that been like? Is that where you are? Are you in a hotel? Are you with friends or family?
No, we are in an Airbnb, just right up the street from our house that his family owns. So we've been able to stay here, but we live now with his dad and his mom. So it's been real interesting.
Yeah, we were never
I can
offered
only
any
imagine.
kind of vouchers.
Is that right, Curtis?
No, I was saying, FEMA never approached us about vouchers or anything for a hotel. So we're fortunate that we have this place to stay. But that's also another source of income that's taken away from what we make to help pay property taxes and maintain our farm.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, help everyone understand, what did you lose in the flood, in the hurricane?
Everything. All of our vehicles except for mine. All of the farm equipment.
Welders,
all of
hand tools, power tools.
Yeah,
Forks.
literally everything we own.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, so basically the way you make a living in the place that you live. I'm so sorry that that's what you've been dealing with, not just on one horrible day, but in the months that follow, your life that follows. You saw President Trump. You told me you also spoke to J.D. Vance. I've been in some of these disaster zones, so I know how hard it is to rebuild. What do you need? What do you need and hope for from the government of the United States?
What we're needing right now is a fair evaluation from our insurance company in a timely manner to pay out. Samaritan's Purse has been a blessing to us. They are willing to fill all the gaps that FEMA and our insurance company has not. We actually have the ability to build on higher ground on another piece of property that connects to our current farm. And that's what our hopes are, to get fair payout and just to tear down the home that we have because it's beyond 50% repairable, and then start over in a fresh place where my wife feels comfortable and I.
Yeah, I'm absolutely terrified to live there again. Who's to say this isn't going to happen again? And I know now, we're on higher ground now, and I still worry when the wind blows or when it rains or whatever it may be.
Right.
It's scary.
It's so interesting. Everybody's talking about California, and that's a mess. But I said, I'm not going to California until I stop in North Carolina. So here we are. We're going to go visit the site, and we're going to work with probably 3 of the congressmen, Republican congressmen, who've been fantastic, whose areas have been affected. And we're looking at the whole concept of FEMA. I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it. To have a group of people come in from an area that don't even know where they're going in order to solve immediately a problem is something that never worked for me. But this is probably one of the best examples of it not working. And there's been some others, like in Louisiana, etc. So we're going to be doing something on FEMA that I think most people agree. I'd like to see the states take care of disasters. Let the state take care of the tornadoes and the hurricanes and all of the other things that happen. And I think you're going to find it a lot less expensive. You'll do it for less than half, and you're going to get a lot quicker response. So that seems to be the recommendation, but we'll be making that recommendation over the next couple of weeks.
Dagan, I think it's important to talk about this in the context of the president's predecessor, President Joe Biden. Hurricane Helene hit. We now know more than 230 lost their lives. It took the former president 4 days to give an on-camera briefing at FEMA. It took him nearly a week to visit. And 8 days after the storm hit, I want to play a soundbite. So 8 days after the second deadliest hurricane to the U.S. mainland, and President Biden had this to say when asked about the storm that was on everyone's mind for a week. So we don't have that. They said they'll pull it up in just a moment, but let me read it for you here, Dagan.
what do the states of the storm zone need? And President Biden didn't hear, so he beckoned the reporter to ask again. And then he said, oh, the storm zone. I didn't know which storm you were talking about.
That's not surprising. And this is political, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. And I want to remind people of Governor Roy Cooper, then the governor of North Carolina, that when the storm hit, only 410 National Guard were activated. That is 4% of North Carolina's National Guard. 6 days after the storm hit, only about 1/10 of North Carolina's National Guard was activated. And it took 6 days after Helene made landfall on October 2nd for Governor Roy Cooper to request active duty troops, 1,000 at that time, but almost a week. And even at that moment, these are facts, they were not given command and control by the governor. And so even if this falls back to the states, as President Trump talked about, the states have a better command of how these funds can be dispersed. But if you are run by someone who is incompetent, and you can look at California as well, then that does not help. And I will just leave it there, because the only reason lives were saved and not more people died in North Carolina is because of the vast private army of helicopter pilots who flew into the mountains, people I know, who were delivering aid and rescuing people day after day after day when there was no one there but private citizens and people from groups like Samaritan's Purse. And it's a disgrace to this nation that it was led by Joe Biden in that way.
Emily, any moment from now, President Trump's about to meet with victims in North Carolina. And I just want to remind our viewers, these 230 people, they're not numbers, they're not statistics, they're human beings. The Craig family lost 11 family members in North Carolina. Imagine that. In a moment's time, 11 members of your family wiped away. Many people still living in tents. We have some pictures of that we'll pull up. Living in tents. This happened months ago. And then Megan Dry lost her little son, Micah. He was 11 years old. His last words were crying out to Jesus Christ, his Savior. And Micah said this: Micah always wanted to be a superhero, Megan said about her son. Instead, he's my hero because he reached for something past flesh, past human, past anything that even grown adults reach for. My son called out to the God Almighty. This is what this moment is about for President Trump. Touching these people, speaking to these people, hugging these people.
Those unfathomable losses to me there is no words to describe them. And you're absolutely right that finally we have a commander-in-chief that is there on the ground immediately to try to empathize and to try to tell the American people, I see you, I see them. Little Micah, who in death has become, frankly, a hero and an inspiration for all of us in life. You're absolutely right about the group. Save Our Allies is still there. The whole point is these private groups, these Americans who reached out to their fellow North Carolinians and their fellow Americans, stood in the gap where the government failed. And I see their success and their continued steadfast, stalwart effort as a continued failure of the government. So finally, we have here, with this new administration, the opportunity to totally turn everything around, because the problem and the failure lied in the dependency of the government to begin with that was set up like a prop by the Biden administration so that people thought they had help coming. The reality is, in those moments, what they learned, the hideous truth under the Biden administration, was that no one was coming, except for their fellow Americans, their fellow North Carolinians, people like Save Our Allies. So here, thank God for President Trump now, and I just look forward to a disaster like that never happening again, because the disaster came afterward.
Harris, and we're still looking at pictures of this devastation. This happened a long time ago, and yet it's still a devastated area. And to hear President Trump say, look, FEMA was better on my watch, but even then, the state could do it better. There are all these conflicts he mentioned.
Look, I mean, FEMA is under the same umbrella as, with all the other things that DHS has to do. We've got the border. There are a lot of things that DHS is doing that's broken. That is a huge agency now. So it's just one of the things that needs to be looked at. So it's interesting. I had, at the end of the Faulkner Focus, asked Trey Gowdy, well, which is it? Is he taking away FEMA by executive action just for North Carolina or in total? And Trey said both. He said probably more, quickly it will come for North Carolina, but he's got to get it out of the hands of a broken agency. You mentioned the death from Katrina and Helene. They are 1 and 2 now in the modern history. And I know in Great Galveston hurricane back in 1900, we had, more than 8,000 people died. But in modern history, we are now looking at 1 and 2. Helene, it is an embarrassment to federal government that it took so long for FEMA to even approach doing what it needs to do. We still have 2 million cubic pounds of debris on the ground from Helene. That could take a long time to cubic feet, a long time to pick up. They've only picked up 1 million cubic feet in debris, and it's been 122 days.
Dr. Siegel, I think another thing worth mentioning when we think about FEMA is the scandal it's enveloped in that did not get the appropriate attention because we were in the middle of the election and its aftermath. This is from the Daily Wire. Government employees told the Daily Wire that at least 20 homes with Trump signs or flags were skipped from the end of October and into November due to the guidance, meaning they were not given the opportunity to qualify for FEMA assistance. Images shared with the Daily Wire show houses were skipped over by the workers who wrote in the government system messages things such as Trump sign, no entry per leadership. This is at the crux of Trump's problem with FEMA.
What a disgrace that is, the politicization of everything in the midst of a national disaster, which has been called a national disaster. And look at the contrast here between President Trump marching in with large S to, by the way, something the mainstream media always overlooks it a week afterwards. They forgot about North Carolina. Their eye is now on California. Forget about North Carolina. Meanwhile, I can tell you medically, homes that were destroyed, the injuries that occurred, the people that were displaced, the mold that's growing on the walls, 13,000 people in FEMA shelters. Listen to this, Kaylee. FEMA has $27 billion in its budget that Biden just gave them. And what's it doing with it? You just said they're politicizing a national disaster. Biden was like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain that said, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, doing nothing, just pulling levers. Where President Trump comes in, puts a spotlight back where it belongs on an area that's still devastated.
And the symbolism here that the first trip out of Washington, D.C. would be to North Carolina. Amid all of these natural disasters, we saw him go to East Palestine when the current president took a long time to do that, and then to North Carolina when the former president took nearly a week to do that.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.